Webhooks to BigQuery. What's the best way to do that, and how exactly do you do that? Here's a step-by-step guide on exactly how to stream your data from webhooks, whether it's from a CRM or anywhere else, straight into BigQuery in an incredibly cheap way and lightning fast speed way as well. The first step you are going to need to know is essentially setting up your webhook. And so first thing is webhook received. So every single webhook is going to be different depending on the service that you're using, whether it's a CRM or anything else. Here's an example webhook for a CRM called Pipedrive. Basically, you just go into the UI, you fill this out, and click save, and then you're ready to use it. Now, on top of understanding how webhooks work, you will also need to understand how APIs work as well. And so there's, of course, going to be documentation for all of these whichever service you're using. And here's an example for the API documentation for Pipedrive. And just keep in mind that they're all going to be different, of course. Now, once you have received your webhooks, essentially, how do you go about, once you've created it, how do you go about receiving it? Well, how I do that is I use a testing tool called ngrok, and it does have a free version. But it also has a paid version. So freemium, we can just call it, right? So freemium, where it's completely free. However, the thing is that it's very annoying to use when it's free. You have to change something in your configuration file, basically your configuration code, every single time you run a test. And so I personally pay for it. And here's what the website looks like. So basically, you can definitely look at it yourself, but this is what I'm using to test a lot of this stuff, and it's amazing. Alrighty. So after you get your webhook and you test it, where do you bring it to next? Google Cloud Functions are incredibly cheap. They are always on, they're always listening, and they scale incredibly well. There's a lot of nuances with using them, of course, and you just go to Cloud Run here in Google Cloud Platform, click Write a Function. It used to be under Cloud Functions, but they're moving it over to Cloud Run. So this is pretty new. As you can see, it's like preview. So use an inline editor to create a function. Just give it a name, test name, and then select, of course, your code and allow unauthenticated invocations, or you can manage through Cloud IAM. The minimum number of instances means that if you are going to allow a cold start, it's a set to 1 to reduce cold start. So it depends on the use case, but generally I keep it at 0, and it's totally fine, especially if you're not having something run 24/7. If you're pulling in webhooks when real users are changing stuff in the CRM, it's only going to be working through business hours. So 8 hours a day, it's going to be listening, and 16 hours a day, it's going to be just sitting doing nothing. So 0 is good. Then you want to open up this drop down menu, and you can keep all of this default. The memory is one of the most crucial drop downs for creating functions. And that's basically, think about it like if you had a computer, if you had a virtual machine where you're essentially the only thing you're running is the bare bones minimum to get this computer to run, and then you're running this program, and that's it. So how much memory is this program going to be processing? And you can actually test that with, I think it's psutils is the package. So we can put that down here really quick. Test with psutils Python pack or library or package library, either way. And you can see how much memory you're processing. So it depends on the use case, but to be quite honest with you, a lot of times all I need is 128, which is the lowest amount. There's a few functions where I'm using 250 or 512, and anything above that. I think if you're doing cloud functions with this much data, I think that's uncommon if you're starting out. Maybe if you're doing something with big data, maybe that makes sense. Um, and then CPU, they changed this user interface. So generally, I just do less than one, and I do the absolute bare minimum, which is 80M, and you can't do anything lower than that. So 79M should error out, as you can see. So 80M, and that's good. I've never had any issues with CPU, so from general ingestion of webhooks, no problem. I have had stuff cause errors because of lack of memory. So if that happens, you can just go back into your configuration. You can edit this later on and just add more memory, and it's pretty straightforward. Now, these next two are really important. Request timeout for 90% of your functions. You can just set it to something like 30 seconds or even like 10 seconds. And then if it does ever time out, you can increase it by 10 seconds after the fact. You don't need to set it that high unless you have some specific use case where you're expecting that, where you've tested it out and it's taken that long. If you haven't, the webhook going from one place to another, it takes milliseconds. So it shouldn't even take 2 seconds. It'll be less than 1 second. Now, talking about concurrent requests per instance, this is I saw a Fireship video on this, and it showed basically some company had their concurrency crazy, probably on the default, and it made their cloud bill go parabolic to 5 figures or 6 figures in like 1 month. Um, I think they refunded it though, but you need to understand this. This is essentially having them work at the same time. And you don't need that because there's scalability. So the cloud functions have the scalability built in for webhooks, for most general use cases that I know of. We're just streaming basic webhook data from a CRM. We're not doing some crazy large app that there's millions of users. You can keep the concurrency to one or zero. 1, 0. Yeah, one. And so you only need one concurrent instance per, you only need one concurrence per instance. Um, and then that keeps the pricing manageable. Every time there's a new webhook that comes in, there's one instance that's generated. And so the scaling, this is really important too. So minimum number of instances is 0, which means that you can enable cold starts. If nothing's going on, nothing's on, and you're not wasting money. The maximum number of instances is incredibly important. I've had programs cause errors as well for this. So this you essentially need to test out for yourself. And it's crucial because you want to understand the limitations of your program when you're doing this, because if your program, creates some kind of error and then it does infinity, you don't want it to cap out at something like, what's the highest? It can't exceed 125. So you don't want it to have 125 instances going at one time. You want it to only have the amount that actually is used in day-to-day business functions. And generally, I mean, it could be 5. However, there are instances where then it shoots up to 6, um, and then you have this error. And so you want to maintain a balance between overloading the system when there's a horrible error, or who knows what would happen. Someone's messing with it for some reason. You want to manage that with keeping your costs down for some crazy black swan event, versus you don't want to have to cause any errors in daily usability. And so 10 is actually a really good baseline, which is their default. And so that's great. Now, there are definitely some webhooks and functions that if it's listening to a lot of things going on in your CRM, it's going to need more instances, maybe 20, for example. maybe even 30, maybe even 30. I've used honestly just up to 30, and it's worked for basically everything. Um, and so from there, you just hit create and wait for this to load. Once it's done loading, you just copy paste your code that you've been testing in ngrok. You paste it here, and then um, this URL is what is the URL that you would use to put into your webhook to listen. So you initially you created the webhook and you were listening with an ngrok URL. Now you're going to replace that URL with this right there. You put in the requirements. Um, it depends on the program, but generally I will have, let me just check really quick. I have a base requirements. So yeah, just Google Cloud Storage requests and Flask, and you should be good. So it could be something like this. And then you can also put in a secret here, and you can manage your API key. You can manage the BigQuery table and data set information here. Usually I'll either do it as a TXT if it's just the API key, or JSON if I want to incorporate multiple different kind of secrets. And you can just put that in there. It's the easiest way to do it. And they do have some kind of management system for managing keys and stuff like that and variables. Honestly, I haven't dug super deep into that just yet. But as long as you have trusted users that can access your Cloud Run, if it's just you and the owner, it doesn't really matter unless they get hacked. Um, and if that happens, then you have other problems to worry about. Now, the other thing after this is if we go back here, so the cloud function, test it. You can test the memory with PSUtils. We can just maybe put that there, something like that. Or whoops. Okay, cloud function, webhook received cloud function, and then just do something like that. Okay. And so after that, you want to obviously consider processing the data in that function. So here's where we can split. And so let's think about this. So we can do one of two things. We can do, uh, here are the two I was considering essentially. Um, so we can go from the cloud function to processing the data appropriately, and we can bring that data into either Google Cloud Storage or we can bring it into BigQuery. And initially, I was thinking, let's bring it into cloud storage because the webhook is giving me JSON data. And basically, what I was doing with this was I was building out a cache. And so the cache was sitting in Google Cloud Storage. And essentially, every time there was a change to something in the CRM, the cache in cloud storage would have a function get that webhook, which the webhook is listening to the change. And then the webhook sends that data to the function. The function then sends that update into the cache that's in cloud storage. So you basically have all your CRM data in cloud storage. And then the idea was that I was just going to do a direct query from cloud storage to BigQuery like that, right? Um, and there was difficulty doing that, working with cloud storage as an external table when it had heavily nested JSON data is not that simple. It doesn't really have a good compatibility. I've done it with CSVs in the past, and it works fairly well. with CSVs, but it was just erroring out with the JSON data. And so, with that being said, I think that you can do one of two things. So I think that if you need the cloud storage to save all of your data because it's going to be used elsewhere in different things, and you need it in a JSON uh, format, maybe you want to save it or something, then I think that you can use cloud storage and you can have the function basically upload that cache to cloud storage. Um, but I think that if you want the data to be usable in BigQuery, then you might as well just utilize the BigQuery API and push those updates directly into BigQuery. And so that, that's what I'm going to be implementing now is making the cloud functions do a select statement, check for the ID before I update it, and then basically either insert or update that ID into the BigQuery table. And so I was looking at the pricing models for each of these. Honestly, I just asked ChatGPT to give me the pricing if I was doing, 10,000 operations per month, something like that. And to hold small amounts of data in cloud storage, it was something like 10 cents, 20 cents. And then basically to hold that amount of data in BigQuery, and then also to do the operations in BigQuery plus the operations in the cloud functions. Um, BigQuery was free because it was under 1 terabyte per month. So if you're doing a small number of data like that, which I mean, most small businesses, most medium-sized businesses would probably be under 1 terabyte per month, or I guess it's split off because it's how much it's processing per month. Um, so I think most would be under that amount. If not, it's actually not that expensive. And so it's basically free, and Cloud Functions and using the APIs might cost a few cents per month. So basically, it's going to be a couple cents, a couple pennies per month, and you get everything fully automated, fully streamed, high availability, high scalability. You can plug obviously BigQuery into any visualization tool. Of course, Power BI, Looker Studio are some of the best options, but there's a lot of other ways that you can use that data. You can bring it straight into Google Sheets as well, which has a lot of usability, especially when you incorporate Google Sheets with users with BigQuery, have BigQuery using connected sheets to query the user inputted data in the Google Sheet, then have that connected sheet data interact with other data sets in the queries that you have in BigQuery to then create the dashboards and all that other stuff. But yeah, that's the idea if you wanted to stream data from webhooks into BigQuery, and that's pretty much it.